I showed you how the Cherokee half-breeds became the leadership of the tribe, sold out neighboring tribes, because that's what a reservation is. It's a tract of land specifically allotted for people who are mixed with both indigenous and European ancestry. It's just a way to consolidate mixed Indians and thereby free up larger corridors of real estate for Euro-American settlers. It was entitled, quote, "Half-breeds, Squatters, and Land Speculators: The Struggle Over the Half-Breed Tract in Southeast Iowa." In the 21st century, modern Native Americans look like Europeans, or at best, Hispanics. And we tend to think that most of these people live on reservations, but actually a Pew Research analysis reports that only about 25% of recognized Native Americans live on reservations. Nevertheless, when black people claim indigenous identity, one consistent criterion used to invalidate our claim is that we don't live on a reservation. Another strike against us is that we don't look like Native Americans because our complexions are too dark and our hair is too coarse. Today we're going to find the answer to the following question. If black people in the US have the most indigenous blood, then why do so few of them live on Indian reservations? And why do they look different from Native Americans? The answer to both questions can be found in the history of Indian reservations. Spoiler alert, Indian reservations weren't created for full-blood Indians. They were created for mulattoes, or, in other words, mixed Indians, which means living on a reservation only confirms that you come from a less indigenous bloodline than that of the Indian who doesn't live on a reservation. When we talk about Indian removal today, we spend too much time talking about what it looked like for the so-called 5 civilized tribes, the Salagi, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Muskogee, and Seminole nations. We talk about the Trail of Tears, which is that perilous, borderline, genocidal odyssey whereby Native Americans and their slaves were herded due west to be put on ships and carted up the river Mississippi. Once there, they were put on Indian reservations. The United States government did this because they were already in the process of rounding up Native Americans and putting them on reservations. They didn't start with the southeastern tribes. In fact, the southeastern tribes were last. Reservations already existed and they served a specific purpose. The United States Department of the Interior, which encompasses the Bureau of Indian Affairs, defines a reservation as, quote, an area of land reserved for a tribe or tribes under treaty or other agreement with the United States, executive order or federal statute or administrative action as permanent tribal homelands, and where the federal government holds title to the land in trust on behalf of the tribe. End quote. Okay. So it's a land trust, which means a legal entity is managing real estate on behalf of its owner. In this case, that property manager is the federal government, and the owner is the tribe. In the old days, any random segment of land would be called a tract. Why does that matter? Because that's the word you need to look for when you're trying to find documentation on some of the earliest reservations. So, now we look back to 1824, when the United States entered into a significant treaty with the Sawook and Meskwaki. You might know these nations better as the Sac and Fox tribes because that's what your junior high social studies textbook would have said if it mentioned them at all. That treaty established one of the first Indian reservations, but that's not the term it used. It referred to the designated land allotment as a half-breed tract. Dr. Matthew Hill is an associate professor of Native American Studies at the University of Iowa. In March of 2018, he delivered a fascinating lecture at a grad school symposium hosted by the University of Northern Iowa. There's no recording or transcript of the lecture available online, but I can show you the title and abstract. It was entitled, quote, "Half-breed Squatters and Land Speculators, the Struggle over the Half-Breed Tract in Southeast Iowa." End quote. Look at the keywords listed for the presentation. It says racially mixed people, and then it says Indian reservations. Why does it say that? Because that's what a reservation is. It's a tract of land specifically allotted for people who are mixed with both indigenous and European ancestry. Quote, "In an 1824 treaty with the Sawook and Meskwaki, the United States created the half-breed tract, an allotment of 119,000 acres between the Des Moines and the Mississippi rivers in southeast Iowa to people with a mixed Indian and French heritage, then called half-breeds." Skip down to Dr. Hill's thesis statement, which is the last sentence. Using court records, treaties, land records, and secondary sources, my project explores the struggle for ownership of the half-breed tract and highlights the significance of mixed-race peoples in treaties between the United States and Indian nations, the role of land speculators and squatters in the battle over Native American land, and the fluidity and confusion surrounding race and identity in 19th century Iowa. End quote. This is where it all began for Indian reservations as we know them today. It's already 1824, so we're past the Louisiana Purchase. These are Indians who descend from the incredibly numerous French settlers who had lived among those tribes to that point. They were actually marrying Indian women so frequently that they created whole clans of mixed Indians, and that's who was put on the reservation.
Hey y'all! First of all, like and subscribe to the channel, but also, Unahia is recruiting, and if you don't know what Unahia is, we're a grassroots activist group lobbying Congress to amend a bill to require education and research to acknowledge the Negro origins of Aboriginal groups of North America. If any of you have it to give, please support the campaign using the QR code on your screen, join the campaign with a donation, and if you have the time, you can even join our staff to help guide the organization, not just for this campaign, but also future endeavors. Don't speak about it, be about it. Let's go.
This process of creating a massive mixed population and then bottlenecking them all on a giant swath of land happened over and over after it happened to the Sawook and Meskwaki. Southeast Iowa became the template by which many subsequent reservations were modeled because they all served the same purpose. That original purpose was to isolate biracial aborigines. It's just a way to consolidate mixed Indians and thereby free up larger corridors of real estate for Euro-American settlers. 6 years after it happened to the Euro-Indians of the Sawook and Meskwaki, the U.S. government established several more such territories all in one treaty. It was a now infamous landmark negotiation, pun intended, formerly known as the Prairie du Chien Treaty of 1830, which doesn't get talked about outside the Abo community. Now, the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's archives host an article online about a rural town called Barada, and it includes a thorough account of Barada's history. It introduces the town by saying the following, quote, "The only Barada in the world, according to the World Book Atlas, is nestled in the hills of northeast Richardson County on what was the half-breed tract. Under the Fourth Prairie du Chien Treaty, which came in 1830, land was given to the outcast half-breeds, primarily the progeny of Indians and French trappers and traders." End quote. Once again, we see land reserved for mixed Indians with significant European ancestry. Article 9 of the Fourth Prairie du Chien Treaty says, quote, "The Sioux bands in council having earnestly solicited that they might have permission to bestow upon the half-breeds of their nation the tract of land within the following limits, to wit, beginning at a place called the Barn, below and near the village of the Red Wing Chief, and running back 15 miles, thence in a parallel line with Lake Pepin, and the Mississippi about 32 miles to a point opposite Beef or Obiff River, thence 15 miles to the Grand Encampment opposite the river aforesaid, the United States agree to suffer said half-breeds to occupy said tract of country." they holding by the same title and in the same manner that other Indian titles are held, end quote. The Oto, Yowa, certain Sioux tribes, and others were all part of this, and they felt mixed Indians owed it to their tribes to take this opportunity to claim territory as secure from the colonizer. The paleface, however, saw his mixed offspring as inferior to himself, and thus not subject to the same laws, so they felt mixed Indians needed to live away from whites. Then comes the Nemaha Reservation, whose history we can learn from a book called An Unspeakable Sadness, The Dispossession of the Nebraska Indians. Page 61 demonstrates what we're looking for here. Quote, "This triangular homeland was carved out of southeastern Nebraska and named the Nemaha Half-Breed Reservation in return for this 138,000-acre cession," end quote. Are you seeing the pattern here? As always, I refer you to the He-Cheat-D principle of discernment. 1 is an incident, 2 is a coincidence, 3 is a pattern. You've witnessed 3 examples from among the Plains Indians. These are called half-breed tracts, and they were modeled after the first reservation established in New Jersey via the Easton Treaty of 1758. That land, called the Brotherton Indian Reservation, inspired Vice President John C. Calhoun to later start the Office of Indian Affairs in 1824, which is the same year that the Prairie du Chien treaties were negotiated to establish all these half-breed tracts in the Midwest. Is it any wonder then that when you look at the Native Americans who have been put on reservations today, they all look either European or Hispanic? Hispanic and Native American are the same thing. The only difference is which European ancestry they have. Hispanic is a mix of American Aborigines with Africans, the Portuguese, and Spaniards. Portuguese and Spanish peoples are Latin Europeans, whereas Native Americans are mixed with French and English whites. You may recall from my presentation on how Cherokee became white that President Andrew Jackson, quote, habitually spoke of the Cherokee Nation and other southern Indian nations as though they consisted of only 2 classes of people, those he called the real Indians, and those he called the half-breeds, end quote. I showed you how the Cherokee half-breeds became the leadership of the tribes, sold out neighboring tribes by allying with the colonizer and assimilated with Euro-American culture. They're the ones Andrew Jackson dealt with directly, and they're also the ones who were carted off to Oklahoma. The Non-Intercourse Act of 1834 was just a series of statutes that began codifying these things in 1790. You'll notice that they no longer refer to half-breeds as half-breeds by the time of the Civil War, because by then they've accepted that the Indians they deal with on a regular basis are just Indians, period. But those Indians are the half-breeds. To call them half-breeds even back then was a misnomer. A black Indian woman procreated with a white European man to produce a biracial child. But if that child was a daughter, then she procreated with another white man. This gradually erases the Indian by mixing out the Indian blood with repeated intermarriages. It's a type of genocide called miscegenation. If you study Native Americans closely today, many of them still have a slightly tan complexion or broad noses or thick lips. You must get out of the mindset of looking at all the modern ethnic groups of the earth and thinking that they always looked the way they currently look. The phenotypes of all ethnic groups change over time for a variety of reasons. Stop looking at Native Americans and calling them Mongolians. We're the ones who came from Mongol society, but we created Native Americans by mixing with Europeans. Then we agreed with Europeans to place them on reservations. Indian removal is the process whereby Europeans then decided to expand on this plan to account for all the tribes with whom they had mixed. They rounded up all the mixed Indians and herded them to new tracts of land that we now call reservations.
Navajo Nation is so large that it's like the U.S. My wife is white. My wife is white. My wife is white. Yeah, cool. I mean, even with our oldest, he's as white as can be. You know, and he's very, very tall for his age, so he stands out among his native brothers and sisters and cousins and all that.